Welcome to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. I'm your host, Andy Rogers, VP of Business Development at KeyTech. Each month, me and a KeyTecher are going to interview a MedTech leader and talk to them about the critical data-driven decisions they make in their programs. Hey everybody, welcome back to MedTech Speed to Data. I'm your host, Andy Rogers, here from KeyTech. A happy 2026, everybody. Excited to get the year going. The first guest of the year is actually a fellow KeyTecher, Jamie Kendall, Senior Computer Engineer at KeyTech. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Hey, Andy. Thanks for having me.
So glad you could join. Topic today is updates to the FDA's regulation as it relates to cybersecurity developing medical devices. But first, I wanted to ask a fun question, break the ice a little bit. Jamie, you didn't see this one in the script, but I have to ask anyways. We're both parents of three kids. A lot of people in our audience, have kids. They're all on devices, maybe not medical devices. Some of them might have medical devices, but I just wanted to get that pearl of wisdom out of you early. When you got three kids and, I assume they all have tablets or will very soon, right? How do you handle cybersecurity with kids and tablets?
Yeah, no, Andy, that's a great question. It's a constant struggle. I mean, I think first and foremost, you got to make sure individual devices are locked down and updated, your standard good cyber hygiene. Also, obviously being a, cybersecurity person, you can get some home office grade, routers and things like that allow you to turn on additional protections and things like that. So really that's the approach I've taken is, making sure their devices are up to date. And then, my internal infrastructure also, assisting with, antivirus and phishing protection and things like that to kind of help them out. Also just kind of trying to teach them, good cyber habits and what to do,
right.
And not to do, on the internet.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we take our KeyTech training for granted, things like, not clicking on links in emails and just simple things to look out for. I feel like that we talked about kids, but it's as much like the senior citizens are also honestly more at risk for this kind of stuff. That's more phishing than cybersecurity, but it's in the same sort of realm.
It's the too good to be true things, right? Is like you get an email, right. Hey, this bag I want for my kids. That's what it is. It's really all shopping. It's like, they're on different shopping sites and they're like, look at this great deal I can get on this name brand thing. And it's always, okay, this is totally not a legitimate, website or not a legitimate sale. So, those are, again, the big things that we're dealing with in my house. So
awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the tip. I wish, we've said for years, I wish you were my neighbor, man. You'd be a great neighbor, all kinds of cool toys and tips on how to keep your products and your kids cyber secure. I guess reflecting on the episode before we get into it, the other thought I had is, I started KeyTech 20 years ago this year and, Bluetooth wasn't even like a thing, right? Cybersecurity wasn't even a thing. We had an episode last year on AI, the FDA's, guidance on AI and how it's, treated as, software in medical devices. And, today's episode is about cybersecurity and that has evolved just as much as AI has. It's a right lockstep. So now that everything is connected, Jamie, just give a little bit of background on who you are, what your role is, and your capabilities, and kind of what you do at KeyTech.
Sure, yeah. So I'm Jamie Kendall, a senior computer engineer and partner. I've been at KeyTech for 13 years, but in software development, closer to 18. Currently, I co-lead the CE department and lead up our cybersecurity activities. I've worked on everything from low-level embedded software to PC software and cloud software and things like that. So that's kind of been my background, here at KeyTech. And you're right. I mean, cybersecurity has evolved over time here at KeyTech. I mean, it's always been something that's been on our minds here at KeyTech. Even when it wasn't specifically called out by the FDA and the FDA guidance, it was something that we had kind of always baked into our process. We were always thinking, okay, how could somebody break this? How could somebody kind of mess with our products and devices that we, we're working on. So it's not something that's really new to us. We've just been kind of following along as the industry has moved to a more formal, regulated, environment.
Right. I mean, spoiler alert, it's all risk-based. Pretty much all product development and life, honestly, is risk-based. Measuring risk reward. But let's break that down a little bit. So you mentioned FDA guidance, and in 2025, the FDA came out with the latest round of cybersecurity guidance. Just touch on that and maybe the subtle shift from guidance to now maybe actual regulation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, in 2023, the final guidance came out, as you alluded to, and we've been kind of living in that world since then. That basically added kind of the formal requirement that you would have to, or the recommendation that you would need to submit cyber guidance along with your, FDA submissions. Now in 2025, they've kind of updated it a little bit based on kind of, I think, what they've learned and what the industry has learned. There's more explicit documentation requirements, specifically around, vulnerability monitoring, more details on the software bill of materials or SBOMs, and things like that. I guess the big thing also is now that it's backed by law, by a statute. So I think that's, one of the other big changes, with the 2025 guidance.
One of the before the show, we were talking about this, making sure we highlight this, the cyber device. What does that term mean in this latest round guidance?
Yeah, so absolutely. So in 2023, cyber device term, came out, and basically was trying to identify what devices need to be kind of covered by, the recommended guidance. And basically it was saying, does your device connect to a network or connect to the internet? And basically I think a lot of folks were, kind of trying to consider, well, does my device really qualify? It has a computer, but we've locked it down and we don't connect it to a network or anything like that. So I think there was a lot of, kind of back and forth and trying to decide, because it's a pretty big drop off if you don't need to do kind of the cyber, cyber process. So I think the big thing here is, they updated that definition to be, very clear, and that, if you have anything that seems like it's, potentially can connect to the outside world, even if it isn't obviously cloud connected, you really can't argue anymore that you're not a cyber device. I think they've kind of closed that, cleaned that up a little bit and made it, I think, more clear that, if you have USB ports, maintenance interfaces, or other kind of, shared networks or things inside your device, you need to be, cognizant that you are a cyber device, and you can't kind of take that path of not submitting the documentation and kind of going through the risk assessment.
Right. Yeah, you've hinted at a few bits here in our process, but let's break it down. So, now we're in the middle part of our podcast. The speed to data portion. Ultimately, it's about data. So when we're talking about the cybersecurity compliant processes, it's what data are you generating or collecting, testing, all those sorts of things to prove that you're compliant to the process. So maybe just for our audience, who's startup companies that they've got somebody who can develop software, but they're not, truly skilled in developing to standards, or strategic companies, right, that are maybe doing innovation and they're trying to figure out just what's just enough, to do, to be compliant to this process. Walk us through KeyTech's cybersecurity process at a high level.
Sure. So over the years, even before this guidance was out, we had been attending conferences and kind of keeping up, in the cybersecurity world, as well as kind of taking our own approach to cybersecurity. At that point, we had baked it into our safety risk management process, but now that it's kind of called out separately, that's the path we've taken. The 2023 guidance really laid the groundwork for our latest process. We've tweaked it slightly with the 2025, but basically, we have generated kind of a cybersecurity risk management plan on our side that really defines all of the elements of the process that I can talk to a little bit here. I guess getting into the details, one of the first things that we always do as part of the overall approach is kind of, working on a threat model. And basically this is a visual model of the system to kind of show, your different elements of the device, where data is flowing, where your trust boundaries are. And this is critical to do early in development. So you can see, where your data is flowing, where you need to protect it, where your data is at rest, and you can kind of map out all your cybersecurity activities to kind of protect that data. And the output of this is usually a, kind of one page, digestible visual that everyone on the project team can look at and assess and go, yep, that makes sense. That's where the data is going. Hey, wait a second, you forgot, this cloud interface or this local interface to export data and things like that.
Yeah. So real quick. So threat modeling, like basically like where are the threats?
Exactly,
basically all of the risks, right? Okay.
Yeah, and again, it's in a digestible visual form, so you can pass it around. I think you want to generally we avoid something that's hundreds of pages long. I think you can get fatigued looking through that. So we very clearly carve out where the inputs outputs of the system are. map out, model where you think your threats are coming from, and then kind of, build your initial architecture, and start your risk assessment based on that.
Got it. So that's the first kind of step in the key tech process, right? Threat modeling?
Yeah. Generally, that's where we start. And then, once you have that outlined, you can jump into the risk assessment. As you mentioned earlier, everything is risk-based. We follow the TIR 57 standard, which outlines how to perform a cybersecurity risk assessment. It parallels the 14971 safety risk assessment. So they're very similar processes. They do connect. There are differences, obviously, but that's kind of the critical starting point once you have your system modeled, is to go through, generate your risks, and start determining additional mitigations and things that you need to kind of build in early to your design to allow for cybersecurity.
Got it. Okay. What else is part of that process?
Sure. So, after you do the risk assessment, generally we start digging into the cybersecurity architecture. And this is called out in the guidance. There's a reference to 4 views or kind of sections. One is the global system view. This is, the kind of the high level, architecture of your system. Talks about the high level, picture, how all the, the hardware and software elements fit together. And the cybersecurity mitigations associated with that. There's a multi-patient harm view that talks about how, one vulnerability or one failure could potentially harm more than one patient, which obviously can happen depending on what the issue is. Also, there's a updatability, patchability. I think every device now needs some way of remote updates. That way, when an issue is discovered or something comes out after the device is on the market, you want to have the ability to update and kind of resolve those remotely without having to do kind of a full recall where all the devices are coming back. And then the final view is a security use case view that outlines different security scenarios outlined in the guidance. So that's kind of where we take it. We do the architecture, kind of hit on the 4 views that are called out in the guidance, and then kind of continue our development process.
That's great, Jamie. And this is all in that's the FDA guidance document, right?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
These frameworks.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And again, modeled our process, after that framework to make sure, we took what we were doing that we think is important, kind of matched it up to what's in the guidance, and, kind of enhanced or removed things, added things as necessary to kind of make sure we, have compliance there.
Okay. Yeah, Jamie, I'm going to go off script here for a second. I as you were talking, like, clearly people need to be well-versed in the guidance. Upload the document into ChatGPT, give me the 10 most important things to do. But my question for you is, do you have any like mental models or like kind of rules of thumb that grossly simplify, compliance to these standards? So for example, like, avoid class 3 software if you can go to class 2. So for your like standard, maybe in-home device, call it like a CPAP type device where bedside, it's probably connected to your phone, to the cloud. Are there like simple things you can do from an architecture perspective to keep the compliance, more straightforward? Or said another way, when does it get exponentially more difficult to comply when you think about product anatomy, things like that? Do you know what I mean?
I think you want to stick to kind of the standard security practices. I think the main thing is you don't want to start kind of rolling your own, security features, such as like, rolling your own encryption, because you can end up, kind of introducing new kind of unknown and novel, vulnerabilities. I think the quick hitter for me is, make sure you use standard accepted libraries and algorithms, for your communication, your encryption, things like that. Also, just kind of doing the basics at this point, making sure that you have signed code, things like that. So, I think there's pressure during the development process to go as fast as possible and, reduce scope. And the critical thing to me is not reduce scope to the point where you're cutting out cybersecurity features. Even if you think that you've convinced yourself that you're low enough risk, you want to make sure that you're not cutting corners on the security. And I think also, another one of our kind of general, approaches or my approach is just to make sure that security is built in early. You don't want to get to the end of your development and realize, we're revisiting the risk assessment during a design review, late stage, or even worse, after you've made a submission and find out that you need to turn on a feature or change something in the design. Obviously, it's much more expensive to do that. Also, once you get on the FDA clock, you have to move quickly to stay on schedule there. So I think those are probably my big takeaways when it comes to things you can do.
I'm remembering your former podcast episode, that the spirit of 62304 sounds like if you were to do that one today, it would be also to the spirit of this cybersecurity standard.
Yeah, absolutely. You just, I think you always, even if your device, you've deemed it low enough risk to not maybe implement certain cybersecurity features, if you have the time, it definitely pays you back in the future to kind of consider adding those early, or even going kind of above and beyond, not only for regulatory compliance, but just to kind of future-proof your device. And again,
Right.
Making sure you're using kind of standard algorithms and standard processes, when you're adding these security, mitigations.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to, use like an off-the-shelf, like Raspberry Pi, for example, and like that sort of coding environment just to stand up a prototype, would that kind of hardware and software environment, be good enough to then apply some of these cybersecurity principles, or you need to kind of go with more of a professional sort of architecture?
It really depends, on what your concerns are, and are you talking about a data collection device or something that's actually going to be out in the field? How critical is it to make sure you have authenticated firmware to make sure that it's coming from who they say it's coming from. I think there might be some limitations there on, something like a Raspberry Pi, but there's a lot of good stuff you still can do. I mean, you can definitely implement, kind of standard encryption algorithms and things like that. On a Raspberry Pi, you may be missing out on, hardware, secure elements that can store keys and things like that. So, I mean, there's definitely things you can do. But if you really want kind of the best level of protection, you probably want to end up with something like a custom designed PCB that kind of includes the hooks, to do those additional kind of security mitigations that you'd be interested in including.
Gotcha. Software bill of materials. So I'm a mechanical engineer, so I'm really interested in the response to this. And what is a software bill of materials, Jamie?
Yeah, so absolutely. So software bill of materials, like any bill of materials, is really a listing of every bit of software that's included in your product. So a lot of times, and maybe this, Andy, maybe you don't, but like, you pull in a standard library, right? But that library that you've pulled in actually has 10 libraries that it has pulled in to its code. And those in turn have 10 libraries that it's pulled in. So you very quickly can end up having software in your system that prior to a software bill of materials, you may not have even known that was in your system, right? So you pulled in some encryption library that you're going to use, but really that includes, some additional Python module. So when new vulnerabilities come out, well, if you don't have a software bill of materials, you have no idea, kind of what's in your system. So by generating this, everything all the way down kind of the tree to make sure that you know exactly what you have, what versions, and then you very quickly can identify, am I vulnerable to this? Or, kind of what you need to do to mitigate it. If you have that in front of you, it's very easy to identify, what software is in your system.
Any other aspects of, kind of like the key tech cybersecurity process worth highlighting? Talk about threats, talked about the bill of materials, talk about the architecture, the assessment. What else is kind of worth noting here?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we're, again, talking kind of more at a high level. There's definitely a vulnerability assessment based on your software bill of materials, where basically you take all of the software, the versions, you put it into the large vulnerability database. You see what, your impacts you. And then from there, you can decide, does this actually impact our product? Do we need to upgrade, any of these libraries, things like that? So, that's definitely part of the process. One of the big things also is the penetration testing and additional testing that is required per the guidance. While we could potentially do that internally, that's been something that we generally have kind of looked to a third-party expert to do. It very cleanly creates the independence that we're looking for during that testing. There's no question of, did this person actually work on the product or anything like that? So, that's kind of the approach that we've taken. We have some trusted partners that we've worked with that have done a great job for us and are very good at that kind of certain aspect of the process. So that's part of it. Yeah. And then again, there's just, traceability that we have to do, reports, testing reports, things like that. Yeah. And that's all kind of rolled into our process that aligns with, the FDA's guidance.
Very good. Dude, is there like a standard number for the FDA, or is it just like a guidance document? Do you know?
Yeah, I think it's just called the final pre-market guidance.
I see.
I think is the
Okay.
exact name. So, and kind of one other interesting thing. I mean, I think, just to give everyone kind of a sense of scale for the documentation, you're looking somewhere and it depends on how you break it up, but to be fully compliant, I mean, you're looking in, the 10 to 15 document range, starting with your threat model, your architecture, the risk assessment, all of the testing reports, things like that. So just to give a sense of scale, I mean, this isn't, one or two documents. It's a pretty large effort, and it's one of those things that, again, you want to start early in your development process. And that is kind of what we recommend and what we follow, because if you were to do this all kind of, towards the end of a project, development cycle, it can really add up in terms of time and, kind of efficiency of generating all these documents, as well as you just, like I said, kind of run the risk of having to make significant changes late in the development game.
So if you're a startup medical device company and you have developed your prototype, maybe it's even, close to clinical trials, and you've just been running lean and you haven't, imparted or applied rather these FDA cybersecurity guidelines, what is the effort to then go back and become compliant with these standards? What do you need to do from a software perspective? Let's just bound it at that, assuming that the hardware is enough.
Yeah. So I mean, you definitely have to go back, and again, as we've talked, a couple times, and do the risk assessment. Start with the threat model, identify the lay of the land of the system, and then do your risk assessment. And this is really where you can kind of run into problems, right? Is you kind of start digging in, and what you thought you had done kind of during development that was, working fine for you. Now, we decide that, we need to add, some additional confidentiality, and we need to use encryption, or, we need to prove that the firmware or the data is coming from who we expect it to be coming from. So then you have to add, some sort of certificate chain or something like that to kind of prove that out. So it definitely can end up being a fair amount of effort late in the game, even if it's purely software changes. A lot of that's documentation, but some of that is also, coming down to implementation and, kind of getting all those features turned on and kind of dealing with the side effects of those. Sometimes, adding something, you're actually, maybe slowing down some part of the process that prior to that, was running fine. So definitely, kind of a lot of unintended side effects and consequences, of adding some things potentially late in the game. So kind of standard caveats to making late stage changes. But, it is a fair amount of effort to add that, after you've gotten that far in the development process.
Gotcha. And then asked another way, maybe from the beginning, if you were to guess, what percent of the overall software effort, again, just bounded at software, there is a hardware element to cybersecurity, but is it maybe 10% of an overall software effort, or 20 or 5? Like, where would you put that number?
It really depends, again, on the product you're developing. But my general feeling is you're probably in that 10 to 20% range. The more connected systems you have, the more criticality of your data and control systems, the higher, safety classification of the software, things like that, all kind of plays into that effort. So I think it's kind of in that range is what I would guess. Yeah.
Very good. All right. We've made it to the end, everybody. We're in the lightning round. I know everybody was waiting for the lightning round. Here we are. So my first curveball question for you, Jamie, is, have you ever been hacked, right? Has a product that you've worked on or had to help been hacked? Like, have you had to actually work with aside from just the preventative nature of compliance to the standard, have you ever had to fix it? You know what I mean?
No, I'm thinking back, over the last, handful of years here. I don't think we've had an actual cybersecurity incident, which is great. Obviously, obviously we put a lot of work up front to, try to mitigate those risks and, kind of keep us generally safe. But yeah, no good stories, on that front.
And then, I have to ask, I'm sure it's coming up. The what is it? The Black Hat conference? Is that that's the place to go every year for cybersecurity, like best practices?
I think that covers, security across the, kind of the entire spectrum of all electronic devices.
Okay.
Obviously they've had a medical device village the last few years, where medical devices and things like that have been kind of torn apart and looked at. It's definitely one of the things we track and kind of attend as we think necessary. Yeah, so it's definitely an interesting one. There's a lot of great talks and breakdowns and new vulnerabilities exposed and things like that. So definitely kind of a piece of the security puzzle that we're looking at, and definitely an interesting conference.
You've been, right?
I have not actually. I have not been directly. I've had friends that have kind of presented, and I've kind of tracked that remotely, and we always check kind of what's going on in the medical device village, and they do post a lot of their talks. So we've been able to kind of hear a lot about what's going on, but haven't been on the ground myself.
Yeah, no, I heard stories. We probably chatted about it of almost like intentional hackathons, if that's the right word, where you're trying to penetrate devices. But, maybe nowadays it's just it's so much more secure than it was, 5-10 years ago, where there were a lot of vulnerabilities probably. Anything else to share with the world on cybersecurity, Jamie?
Yeah, I think the big takeaways for me, obviously the guidance is important, but I don't think we should just treat that as a checking the box. We really want to make sure the devices we're building are truly safe. I think sometimes we go down the rabbit hole here during development as engineers of just the kind of the what if game. It's like, well, what if someone has physical access, and what if they take the system apart, and what if they, solder on this, or what if they do this? And I think you can very quickly maybe become somewhat jaded and say, well, if they have physical access, they can just take the chip off or do whatever they want. But really, we're looking for those practical measures that kind of confirm the right software is on the system, encrypt critical data such that we have, traceability to that, making sure we're using kind of, well-established, algorithms and libraries, and then just really keeping up with updates and making sure we're patching and, keeping on top of vulnerabilities as they come out. So I think those are, kind of the big things that I wanted to talk about. The other thing is just really starting early on cybersecurity process. It could really be difficult if you get late into the game and then decide that, you need to add something and you have to make a PCB change on, a system that has maybe already gone into pre-production and has hundreds of units, and then you have to go back and change. So, really just trying to avoid that as much as we can, while kind of respecting the schedule and the budget, of the systems we're working on, and just making sure cybersecurity is a priority. And again, not just a checking a box on the regulatory side.
Cool. Very good. So if anybody has any cybersecurity questions or needs, reach out to Jamie. You can see him on our website, or, reach out to the contact form on our website. Jamie, thanks again for coming on the episode, and looking forward to, learning more from you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andy. It was a lot of fun.
Thanks, everybody. Until next time.
Thanks for tuning in to MedTech Speed to Data, a KeyTech podcast. Join us each month for more ways to get the right data faster to inform critical decisions. Find additional resources on our website, keytechinc.com. If you like this episode, don't forget to subscribe, and please leave a review on iTunes whenever you listen. Thanks.